works, because Zoom and YouTube have to talk to each other. So we've had
I think it's working.
Something's working. Yeah, the blue thing is moving. Okay, this looks like it's worked. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I don't know if you can see us yet. Let's see over here. Okay. Okay. Maybe we are live. So if everybody is watching, welcome. It's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here. I am going to take some questions. So if you're around and you want to do a bit of an astrology Q&A, you are welcome to join us. I have one of my amazing teaching assistants, Britt, joining me today. Welcome, Britt.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
It is great to have you. We have got, a little bit of time, and we thought we'd hang out and take questions. I know I haven't done a YouTube live for a while, and sorted. I can see Dina is here in the chat. Welcome. If you are listening, you're welcome to let us know where you are joining from in the chat. And if you've got any questions, I know, for instance, next week we have a big lunar eclipse in Pisces coming up. Is that something that you've got on your radar, Britt, about the astrology of the moment that we're in?
Totally. Yeah. Right now I'm just in Venus trine Jupiter oblivion.
Love it. Love it. Where are you at with that? What's your take on Venus trine Jupiter?
I mean, I just feel it's such a nice aspect to have in, especially after like last month. It's just it's one that's just nice and social and really eager to connect with folks and yeah, that's I'm really liking that sense.
Totally. I even feel that, I know Britt and I have been trying to schedule to do this YouTube live for a while. And a part of me was like, oh, and we're doing it just a couple of days before Venus in Libra will trine Jupiter in Gemini. And I'm like, I think that's even part of like the coming together, the connective energy of this moment. The Venus trine Jupiter aspect is at its strongest on Sunday, September 15, but you'll definitely be feeling it in the days, even I think a week, like the whole week leading up to that date, I think has got that like collaborative energy, that optimistic energy, even the idea of like, yeah, friendships are just really lovely, or romantic relationships are just really lovely. And it's just a really golden aspect. It's so nice when the benefics come together in a helpful way. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, super, super good. Okay, so what I want to talk a little bit about before we get into more questions is I want to make sure that you all know that I've got a special offer on my astrology training program right now. There's a bundle offer that we just do once a year, and it's only available until September 15. So until midnight on September 15. And this is the program where I teach students everything that I know about astrology that I use with clients in practice all the time. And Britt, I know you're a past graduate of the program. Is there anything that you would want to share that might let students know a little bit about what to expect? I don't know if you can
I
do
just
it.
it's just so good. I really recommend I couldn't recommend this program more. Um it's so comprehensive, and at the same time I really feel like Kelly is a great teacher. She really makes everything super clear, super concrete, but also she is really good at making sure that there's a bit of a didactical structure underlying the program, so everything comes at its own time and it's really digestible, and that makes it super fun to learn. And really, yeah, I think Kelly's just the best teacher, so I couldn't recommend it
That's
more.
so kind. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we've had that feedback about the astrology training program a lot, that it's really structured. There's a lot of support for students as they go through. There are, homework activities, you get personal feedback, and we do take you through a lot of material in the 18 months, but we do it in this really step-by-step format so that you don't get overwhelmed as we go, which I know is a huge thing for people as they are learning astrology, because it is such a vast subject. Okay, so if you're interested, yeah, pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com. There's lots of info there. There's a video introducing you to the program. We've got a one-time bundle payment where you can just make one payment and your 18 months of study is covered. Or there's also a payment plan for anybody for whom that is more accessible. So 12 monthly installments. It basically adds up to the same price. It's just whatever works better for your budget. If you've got questions about studying astrology with me, please let us know in the chat. Otherwise, we have got, a few things we can share about the current astro. I know we were just talking about Venus trine Jupiter, Britt. One of the other things that is so kind of it's sort of building in the background, I think, astrologically, is this Mars in Cancer transit that we're having that is going to, be an extended Mars in Cancer transit. I'm definitely aware of that kind of mood affects motivation vibe where I'm already noticing that I'm having these really productive periods. And then I have these periods where I'm like, just flat on the couch for a few hours, like resting or recharging.
Absolutely.
Are you noticing something similar?
Yes, I am. And I am, of course, ruled by Mars. So for me, like Mars is my ruling planet. So I always keep an eye on what Mars is doing. And yeah, I feel like it's a bit more stop and start with Mars and Cancer. Just like whatever's going on with me emotionally is usually what influences my energy and my mood really
Yes.
much. And I also feel like it's a bit more reactive for me personally. That I just really have to watch myself and take a bit more of a pause before I react because I
Mm.
do think that reacting in the first moment when I hear something is not always as the most productive.
That is such a good point about Mars in Cancer, isn't it? Because Mars in Cancer has this real sensitivity and it can feel a little bit like it easily or quickly goes to that, like, oh, am I being attacked here? Do I need to like fire up or defend myself or do I need to attack back? And I think all of us are going to out regulating our own emotions and that idea of do I, continue my response from that first reaction or do I give myself a moment to breathe or to feel into things or to let a bit of space and distance pass and then kind of respond. I think that's such a big thing of Mars in Cancer is like reacting versus responding and kind of where are you on that piece. So Mars did move into Cancer around September 4, and Mars will be in Cancer for a few months. I think it's like November sometime that Mars goes into Leo around the start of November. So we have like 2 months of Mars in Cancer, which is unusually long anyway. But it's like, wait, there's more because Mars goes into Cancer in early November. Then it does a little retrograde and it will actually come back into Cancer in that retrograde condition in early January. So January and a good part of February, we have Mars retrograde in Cancer. So that's where we're going even deeper with our sensitivities, what we want to defend around. And then Mars will be direct in Cancer in March, first part of April. So it's really not till late April that we're fully done with Mars in Cancer. So that's a little bit of an unusually long Mars in Cancer vibe, but it is because we're going to have this Mars retrograde. I know we've got some people joining us in the chat. Britt, any questions coming through that we can address for people?
Yeah, I see a question from Hashasi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Venus is the Time Lord for me during this year as Libra rising. I wonder how the next Venus retrograde in Aries will manifest in my life.
That's such a great question. Yeah. So if Venus is your time lord, you're going to want to pay special attention to her transits, her aspects, and her configurations as she's going about the sky. So that Venus Jupiter aspect we're talking about, which is kind of in play right now, that's really great for you. And if you have any big goals or big ambitions that you're trying to activate in this year that Venus is affected Time Lord, I would say the time is now. The cosmos is giving you that green light. So we want to go now, like do as much as you can now. And I know your question, though, is about how will Venus retrograde affect you? So when your Time Lord goes retrograde, so it could be Venus, could be Mars, could be Mercury, could be Jupiter or Saturn, you're going to go in period. You're going to find that you're less motivated to push or drive forward, and that you're more interested in review, reflection, maybe even some rethinking or questioning things that you've already done. So I find that the retrograde energy is a little bit like a holding pattern or like treading water, where instead of trying to create that progress or momentum, we're sort of dropping down or going deep. So the Venus retrograde, for any of you who are curious, we're just definitely diving into early 2025 astrology here, which I love to do. So Venus will start her retrograde around the 1st of March, 2025, and she'll be about 10 degrees of Aries when she goes retrograde. Venus will be retrograde until around the 12th of April, and Venus retrograde will bring her all the way back to about 24 degrees of Pisces. So Venus will be retrograde in the first part of Aries and the last part of Pisces. Now, if Venus is your time lord, that period in March where Venus is both retrograde and in Aries might be a little bit of a frustrating time where you're dealing with delays or disruptions, or things are just not going to plan. And once Venus comes into Pisces, that's a great sign for Venus. It's her exaltation place. But even better, the second half of April, when Venus is direct in Pisces, that's going to be a time for you where there might be some second chances, or you're catching up and clearing up any delays or crossed wires that might have happened in March. Britt, do you keep an eye on like Time Lords when they're retrograde? I know you mentioned earlier Mars is important to you, and that's why you're tuned in to the Mars retrograde.
Yeah, I definitely do, especially because with Venus we don't get it every perfection year, right? Because Venus doesn't
Yes.
retrograde that often, and with Mars the same. So if that is happening, I usually do have a little alarm bell with in my mind when I know that that's a perfection
Yes.
year, because you do have this what you're saying. There's more of a reflective quality to the year then, and also I think patience is such a good keyword to remember, because you will have to go over things multiple times, especially with a retrograde. You will have to rethink, revisit. So depending on what planet is your time lord, I think patience is definitely something that is a bit more important in a retrograde period.
Oh, I love that. So the idea of like patience and that you're just going to be going over things more often. It's not like a one and done. It's like, well, we had an attempt and now we're having a second attempt or even
Hmm.
attempt. Yeah, such a great question and so good to keep track of. And so that was some info about like if you're in a Venus perfected year, and Venus will be your time lord in that March, April period. Of course, if you're in a Mars perfected year, you'll want to keep that sort of similar awareness for December, January, February, when we'll have Mars retrograde. It's a little bit of like a cosmic frustration moment over the next 6 months or so, isn't it? Where we have Mars retrograde, and as soon as Mars gets back on track, then Venus goes retrograde.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
speaking of, I think there was another question in the chat. There was someone, Lori Kay from New York, who was eyeing the eclipse in Pisces that we're having next week, and
Yep.
was curious how the nodes shifting in a new year will affect her or them, because they have their natal south node in the 12th house at 29 degrees. How will that affect me now that it will go north node in Pisces?
Yeah, this is such a good question because we are having a bit of a change where the eclipses and where the nodes are concerned. Our lunar eclipse in Pisces, which is coming up September 17 or 18, is the first eclipse in Pisces. And we're actually in Pisces now off and on for about 2 years until the latter part of 2026. So whatever the Pisces part of your chart is, you're about to go deeper, but you're also about to kind of clear the cobwebs, and part of that reason is that in January of 2025, the North and South node by transit are going to move into new signs. So we're going to have transiting North node move into Pisces. It's been in Aries since mid 23. And at the same time, the transiting South node is going to move into Virgo. That's happening in January of 2025. So January of 25, the nodes are leaving Aries, Libra, and the nodes mostly move backwards, which means they're going into the signs of Pisces and Virgo. So the transiting North Node coming into the Pisces part of our chart is going to add this intensity and this hunger, this sort of insatiable craving for more. And so we might overdo it in the Pisces part of our chart over the next 18 months as the North Node transits there. But we're also trying to kind of have more experiences that we can then digest into more wisdom, more understanding of feeling, and probably a little bit about healing as well. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with the eclipses starting in Pisces and then the North Node moving into Pisces next year. Do you have any thoughts that you want to either of those pieces, Britt?
Yeah, I totally agree. And with the North Node especially, there's always an intensification is one of the key words I like to think of with the North Node. So whatever Pisces represents in your chart, which house it represents, if you have any placements there, they will be amplified and intensified by the North Node there, and especially the eclipses that will be happening at several points over the next couple of years.
Yes, yes, I know. I was like, because when I was just doing some deep dive research, I just put an article up on my website about the eclipse, and I was like, okay, so we sort of had eclipses in Libra just for 12 months with the way the eclipse cycle shook out, but we're going to have eclipses in Pisces for nearly 2 years. So it's always a little different because the eclipses are kind of working on their own unique pattern.
Yeah.
But I think generally, the North Node coming into Pisces, there's a lot more healing, feeling, releasing. There's a lot more sensitivity for sure. For sure. How are the questions going? Is there any other questions we should take a moment to address? I feel like we can do, a few
Yeah.
more for sure.
There's loads. Marie is asking, Mars is in my eighth house in Cancer, conjunct the part of fortune. My moon is in Capricorn in the second house. Any advice? So this is a moon-Mars opposition in the second and eighth house.
Yeah. So we've got Mars in Cancer in the eighth house and then the moon in Capricorn in the second. So whenever we get moon Mars combinations, we are talking about some of that Mars in Cancer stuff that we were talking about, that sensitivity, that like protectiveness emotionally, but also something that can be very defensive. So the idea with moon Mars, particularly if we're in Capricorn and Cancer, are we appropriately defended and protected, or are we over defended and I think when we've got a moon Mars aspect, we're sort of learning about what comfort feels like, and we might have had some early experiences in our life where we didn't have safety or protection, so we can kind of then have this high alert quality of, oh wow, I haven't felt safe, but I know how to be ready to act or to be ready to advocate for myself. That combination too of moon in Capricorn, Mars in Cancer, we're technically these planets, like the moon in Capricorn is technically in detriment, Mars in Cancer is technically in fall. There can be this or sensitivity towards a lack of safety and security for other people. And what that can mean is that you can become a very powerful or passionate advocate for improving circumstances for people who don't have that sense of safety or security. So there's sort of some general moon, Mars, Cancer, Capricorn things. But then if we bring in the second and eighth house, we can talk about how maybe money or financial stability is really tied in to that feeling of safety. So in terms of advice, I would really encourage that idea of protectiveness towards your financial matters so that you can experience what it's like to have some financial protection, because that weirdly can tie into a sort of stronger emotional foundation as well. I feel like that's such a juicy aspect, and we probably could talk about it for an hour, but hopefully that gives a few ideas. Britt, is there anything that comes to your mind as you're thinking about that pattern?
Well, I may or may not be a Moon Mars person in my own so I may or may not have some experience with this in my own chart. And something to add to that, just generally the aspects, the way I experience it or may not experience it is also telling the difference between when to act and when to rest or when to nourish
Mm,
yourself, because when these two planets are talking to each other in the chart, there's often a bit of a tension between the two, where it's like, especially when we have placements in detriment or fall, of course, a sense of maybe not acting when you're too tired and you want to rest, or resting when you actually need to act. Like sometimes that is something that is a bit more difficult to tell the difference between.
That's a great point. That idea of like how the moon represents nourishment and care and restorative practices like rest or, a simple kind of home cooked meal versus Mars, which is so, geared towards taking action and doing and being, an initiator out in the world. And so that's really beautiful, your share there, Britt, about having to make choices between those two. Because I think when the moon is in aspect to Mars, we get this sort of instinct towards action and activity. We need the reminders to do the moon things, because the moon, if left to its own devices, when the moon and Mars are in aspect, we often will just think, I'll just do one more thing, or I'll just do that next thing. Whereas we need to kind of interrupt with our conscious awareness and mindfulness and say, actually, I've done enough things for today.
Yeah.
I'm going to slow down. I'm going to rest. I'm not going to do the laundry. I'm just going to make dinner and then I'm going to rest, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's beautiful advice.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad. And I loved you sharing your story. That's beautiful. I have so many great questions coming in. Where do you want to go next?
Yeah.
I'm giving you all the power, Britt.
Oh, let me see. There's so many. We're talking about Time Lords. Aaron is sharing their Time Lord is Jupiter. Curious what to expect this eclipse. Any already experienced extreme changes. So feeling the energy. Another question about the eclipse from Jogi's Choice. The eclipse will oppose my moon in Virgo. Will I have trouble with my mother or a female friend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with eclipses, I often really focus my attention on the sign that the moon is in at the time of the eclipse. So this eclipse is happening under a full moon in Pisces. It does mean that the sun is in Virgo, but the energy of the eclipse, that sort of churning or unsettled quality, is really occurring around where the moon is. So that's happening in the sign of Pisces. So in terms of the will I experience some sort of problem or challenge with a female in my life or with my mother? I would sort of probably not get to that the eclipse. But if you have the moon in Virgo, I'd be curious about, has Saturn been opposing that moon in Virgo? And that could certainly bring some changes with a woman in your life or in your relationship with your mother. Depending on the degree of where the moon in Virgo might be, it could be that Jupiter and Gemini is aspecting and affecting that moon in Virgo, or it might be that transiting Neptune is. So for me, with this eclipse, it's happening at 25 degrees. So if you have planets like right around 25 degrees Pisces, like maybe 24, 25, 26 Pisces, they will be really pulled into the eclipse. But I wouldn't be too concerned for me about planets in Virgo being affected by this eclipse. But that's not to say there aren't other things that are affecting planets in Virgo right now, which could certainly be contributing to those kinds of experiences. Eclipses, Britt, is it similar or do you have a different approach?
No, I totally agree. That's there's so many moving parts, of course, with these with the eclipse
Totally.
in general. I feel like that's a good keyword, but also, of course, with all the other placements in the mutable signs, there's a lot happening right now.
Absolutely. There is so much going on with the mutable signs at the moment. Jupiter, Saturn, the eclipses. Thankfully at the moment, Mercury is in Virgo, which is a really helpful energy for some of that mutable energy. Mercury in Virgo is bringing some grounding, some practical, and sort of some skills with organizing, also some skills with assessment and analysis. So Mercury in Virgo is really able to kind of practically discern this is going to be great to focus on, that has value, and these things don't, that sort of efficiency organization piece. Okay, I don't know if there's one or two other questions, Britt, that are on your mind.
Well, there's another question. There's another question about the Mars retrograde. Since we're talking about mutable signs, who's
Yep.
more affected by this Mars retrograde, fixed sign or cardinal, which I think is a good one.
That's a great question. Yeah, so the Mars retrograde starts in Leo in early December. And then by the time we get to early January, the Mars retrograde will be in Cancer. So just months of like time, the Mars retrograde is much more time in Cancer than it is in Leo. Mars also has that fall condition in Cancer, which just creates a little bit more of an added quality of frustration to Mars in Cancer. So, in terms of like who might be more affected by the Mars retrograde, I think people that have placements in the second half of Cancer, or maybe the second half of all of the cardinal signs. So that's Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. You're going to get like 3 really strong hits from Mars as it does that 3-part process through Cancer. So there's the first direct hit, then there's the retrograde pass, and then there's the final direct hit. So I do think there's going to be a lot more going on for cardinal sign people with this particular retrograde. Not to say that if you have planets in early Leo, just to give you the degrees, Mars will be retrograde from 6 degrees back to 0 degrees of Leo. And then Mars will be retrograde from 29 degrees of Cancer back to 17 Cancer. So you can see that Mars is retrograde through almost half of the zodiac sign of Cancer, but only retrograde in those first 6 degrees of Leo. If you do have planets in the early part of Leo or Taurus or Scorpio or Aquarius, those fixed signs, you will still get that Mars sort of 2-step forward, 1-step back clarity to Mars in Leo, and there's less of that kind of convoluted, entangled energy. Mars retrograde in Cancer has a lot of this sort of entangle, everything is tied together, it's kind of messier. If you've got early placements in the fixed signs, you've got a little bit of that Mars retrograde, and some of you will have had a little bit of an activation from Pluto as it's been going into Aquarius this year. So the feel is very different if you're early fixed versus that second half of cardinal. But on balance, I think this Mars retrograde is definitely having a stronger influence on the cardinal, longer in time, longer in space as well. Is that sort of how you've been thinking about it as well, Britt?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of range and intensity and time spent in the sign, I think Cancer is wins from Leo. I would only add that if you do have placements around that 6 degree part of Leo or fixed signs, you will get the station there of Mars retrograde, and that will linger a while. So as Kelly always says in her teachings, that's like a super important point where we might see some slowing down of significations having to do with Mars. So maybe some tiredness, some lack of energy, lack of motivation. And if that hits something in your birth chart, you will probably feel that also.
That's really good. Thanks, Britt. Yeah, for that station degree at 6 Leo when we're talking about Mars. I can see so many more people are jumping into the chat. So welcome. You are welcome to let us know where you're joining from. We might just do one more question, maybe 2. We'll see. I'll give Britt a minute to think about what questions she might want to look at. We're also making sure that you know about my live cohort intake for my astrology training program. The next group of students begins next week, mid-September, September 16. And to celebrate, there is a special bundle price for the full training program, which you can access if you register before midnight on Sunday, September 15. So pop over to kellysastrology.com if you want more details on that. You can make a one-time payment or you can make 12 monthly installments, but registering before midnight on Sunday means you lock in the best price for your training. Why would you want to study astrology? I don't know. There's so many reasons. There's probably too many reasons to list. If you are curious about who you are, why you're here, and what you're meant to do in your life, learning astrology is a game changer. If you are wanting to add some magic into your life, if you want to feel more empowered, or maybe you want to help people using astrology because you know how helpful it has been for you. These are all great reasons to consider studying astrology in a really supported and structured way. So if you want to find out more about my program, you can definitely ask us questions in the chat and we'll be happy to answer, or you can pop over to kellysastrology.com where there is a full info video, lots of info on the course page. But if you need to get some personal support, feel free to reach out to the help team team. They're on help@kellysastrology.com. They would also be happy to answer any of your questions as well. And Britt here, who is doing such a wonderful job. Britt is a graduate of the program. She now works as a teaching assistant inside the program. And Britt, since we're talking about you, just putting the spotlight on you for a moment, where can people find out more about you and your work with astrology? What's your website?
So my website is www.innerverse.nl. I am based in the Netherlands, so it's innerverse.nl. And you can reach out there or through email, brit@innerverse.nl.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm so glad because I know there'll be lots of people who will be interested in your work and also just fascinated to know that there's somebody they can connect with that is in Western Europe as well, which I think is always nice to get, different takes and perspectives. Okay, let's go back to our questions. How are we going for questions?
So we have still a bunch. Since we were talking about Mars, there was
Yeah.
an earlier question from Dina. Mars retrograde over the MC. Thoughts about that three-part story?
That's a great question. And Dina, if you're still listening, can you let us know what your midheaven degree is? Like, is it in that Cancer zone or is it in early Leo? And you might not be here, and that's totally okay. But yeah, so basically how the Mars retrograde is going to work. Let me give you the degrees again. So Mars starts its retrograde at 6 Leo around December 5th, and it will retrograde back to 17 Cancer. Mars will be retrograde until about the 23rd of February. So December 5th to the 23rd of February, that's the timeline for Mars retrograde. And Mars starts the retrograde at 6 Leo and comes all the way back to 17 Pisces. Sorry, 17 Cancer. I've got the eclipse in my brain. So 17 Cancer, Mars retrograde. So if you have anything in that zone from 17 Cancer to 6 Leo, Dina has her midheaven there. Mars is going to hit that thing there 3 times in relatively quick succession. So the first activation is Mars saying, hey, what else do you want to do? What are you irritated about? What's not working for you around this part of your chart? If it's your moon, it's about your emotions, maybe your health. If it's your midheaven like Dina, what is it that you've always wanted to do about career? And what is it that you're frustrated about that you haven't taken action around in terms of career or life direction? Then Mars is going to move on. And at some point, a few weeks later, could be a couple of months later, Mars will retrograde back over that point. And he's going to be like checking in. How are you going with that thing that you wanted to do that you haven't done? How are you going in addressing the things that are frustrating you about this part of your chart or this part of your life? So it's like a mid-process check-in when the retrograde hit happens. And then some weeks after that, maybe a couple of months, Mars will be direct and will pass through for the third and final time. And now we're in that place of completion. Right, I have tried a few things and now I know this is where I'm going. So that last hit of Mars coming over that point, particularly in Dina's case, if it's on the midheaven, that may be clarity around direction. It may be confidence to make a choice. It might be motivation to strike out in a new direction. And so we want to give ourselves some grace and some patience in those first and second hits of Mars going over something in our chart, because we know the story is not at its end point yet. And that doesn't happen until we get that third and final direct hit of Mars. In Dina's case, over the midheaven. Dina and I have a relationship off YouTube. She's in my membership, so I know a little bit about where Dina's at with work and career. So I can imagine how this is relevant for her. And so, Dina, hopefully that also clarifies some of the timeline of taking your time to try different things or look at different options where work and career are concerned, and maybe setting a little bit of a deadline of whenever that last direct hit of Mars on the midheaven is, not to kind of have your whole life figured out, but to have some clarity around, this is the next step I'm going to take. This is the choice that I want to do over the next few months. So that's what I would think about Mars retrograde over those 3 hits of the midheaven. Is there anything that you would add to that, Britt?
I couldn't have said it better. I just feel like patience is the key word with Mars in general, with this transit, but just with a retrograde period, knowing that you don't need to have it all figured out, don't need to understand everything as it's unfolding, just taking into account that it will take time, and you can harvest the insights after the last hit happens.
That's so beautiful, that idea of harvesting the insights after the last hit happens. I know that, in modern life, we have a lot of this sort of immediate results mentality, or this sort of instant outcomes. And sometimes the most rich and inspiring places that we end up, they happen after that, like patience, that testing, that reflection. And so sometimes just adjusting our timelines, this might take longer than I think, but I may end up in a better place as a result. That's such a good way to work with any retrograde, but particularly this Mars retrograde coming up in December of 2025. I love that we had a whole theme here today where we were able to deep dive on Mars, and that's so appropriate, Britt. I know you were sharing that Mars is a really important planet in your personal chart. So we will probably wrap things up now. Britt, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you again? Just a quick shout out to your website.
Yes, thank you. It's innerverse.nl. So innerverse.nl.
Yeah, I love
And I
that.
do,
Yes,
yeah, I
tell us
do
what you do.
birth chart consultations, and I also do embodiment coaching with astrology. So if you're interested in working long term, I also offer that.
And that's partly because you have a background in yoga as well. Yeah.
Yes, yoga,
Yeah.
body work, and coaching and counseling. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
combining all of that into a nice, juicy package.
I love it. I love it. That's so appropriate. We love, that juicy, rich energy. Britt has some water sign placements. I do too. So we love that kind of vibe. And I'm Kelly from Kelly's Astrology. If you don't know a lot about me yet, please pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com. If you have known about me for a while, or you've just been thinking about studying astrology for a while, I have a special bundle offer on my astrology training program, which is available just till midnight on Sunday the 15th. So take advantage of that if you're ready to go deeper with your astrology. Britt, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a blast. We are planning to do it again. So if you're following along out there in YouTube land, watch for Britt and I coming back again, maybe sometime next month to answer some more questions. Wish everyone all the best over the next few weeks, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again, Britt.
Thank you all.
Bye.